A billionaire's daughter cries day and night. No doctor can explain why. But when a humble nanny discovers what everyone missed, the truth will shatter everything they thought they knew. Quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and subscribe. Let's jump into the story. The penthouse office on Fifth Avenue trembled with the sound of agonizing cries. 6-year-old Emma Bradford had been screaming for 72 hours straight, her small body convulsing with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unreachable. Her father, tech mogul Harrison Bradford, stood frozen by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection showing a man who'd conquered Silicon Valley but couldn't stop his daughter's tears. "Mr. Bradford, I've examined every possibility," Dr. Morrison said, closing his leather medical bag with a defeated click. "I'm the 5th pediatrician this week. There's nothing physically wrong with Emma that we can detect. Perhaps it's psychological." "Psychological?" Harrison spun around, his voice sharp as broken glass. "My daughter has been crying non-stop since her mother's funeral 3 months ago. Every specialist in New York has walked through that door, and not one of you can help her." Emma lay curled on her canopy bed, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks, her tiny hands pressed against her ears, the same position she'd held for weeks. Mrs. Chen, the stern housekeeper who'd raised Harrison himself, hovered nearby with a damp cloth, her usually composed face creased with worry. "Sir, perhaps we need someone who understands children differently," Mrs. Chen suggested quietly. "Not another doctor. Someone with maternal instincts." Harrison's jaw tightened. The word maternal felt like a knife since Victoria's sudden death. His wife had been everything, mother, partner, the heart of their home. Now their penthouse felt like a mausoleum, filled with Emma's endless crying and his helplessness. "I've hired 4 nannies," Emma screams louder when they approach. "Then hire someone Emma chooses," Mrs. Chen said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Tomorrow I'll arrange interviews, here in Emma's room. Let her decide." That night, Harrison stood in Emma's doorway, watching his daughter's small chest heave with exhausted sobs even in sleep. He'd built a tech empire worth $12 billion, revolutionized cloud computing, been named to Forbes' most powerful list 3 years running. None of it mattered. He couldn't save his own child. His phone buzzed. Another board meeting he'd miss, another acquisition he couldn't focus on. His company, Bradford Tech, was suffering from his absence, but he couldn't leave Emma like this. Somewhere in this city of 8 million people, there had to be someone who could help her. He just didn't know. That person would arrive tomorrow wearing a second-hand coat and carrying everything she owned in a single backpack. Or that she would see what 17 medical specialists had missed. Or that her discovery would unravel secrets that went far beyond a little girl's mysterious tears. The crying continued through the night, echoing through the empty halls of the penthouse like a ghost. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Bradford penthouse at exactly 9 a.m., her Metro card still warm in her pocket from the 2-hour commute from the Bronx. At 28, she'd worked as a nanny for 6 families, putting herself through nursing school 1 semester at a time. The doorman's raised eyebrow at her worn peacoat told her everything about how she looked compared to the usual visitors to this address. Mrs. Chen met her in the marble foyer, studying her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You're the 6th interview today. Mr. Bradford is desperate, but his daughter is particular. Follow me." They passed through rooms that belonged in architectural magazines, a living room with a Steinway grand piano, a dining room that could seat 20, walls adorned with original Rothkos and Pollocks. Sarah's entire apartment could fit in the hallway, but the wealth didn't intimidate her. She'd learned that money couldn't buy what children really needed. The crying grew louder as they approached Emma's bedroom. Sarah's nursing training kicked in automatically, analyzing the sound, not the wailing of a tantrum or the sobbing of sadness. This was pain. Consistent, unrelenting pain. Emma's room was a little girl's dream. Pink canopy bed, shelves of untouched toys, a reading nook with hundreds of books. but the child curled in the center of the bed looked like she was trapped in a nightmare. Blonde curls stuck to her tear-stained face, her small body rigid, both hands pressed desperately against her ears. Harrison Bradford sat in a chair nearby, looking nothing like his business magazine photos. His shirt was wrinkled, stubble covered his jaw, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who hadn't truly slept in months. 3 other nanny candidates stood uncertainly near the door. "Emma, sweetheart," Harrison's voice cracked, "these nice ladies want to meet you." Emma's crying intensified, her whole body trembling. The first candidate, a middle-aged woman with impressive credentials, approached the bed with a cheerful smile. "Hello, Emma. I've brought you a—" Emma's scream pierced the air, her hands pressing harder against her ears. The woman retreated quickly. The second and third candidates didn't even make it that close before Emma's reaction sent them backing away. Sarah watched carefully, noting how Emma's response wasn't fear or defiance. It was agony. "Miss Mitchell?" Mrs. Chen gestured her forward. "Your turn." Sarah didn't approach the bed. Instead, she sat down on the floor, 10 feet away from Emma, and began humming, a soft, wordless melody her own mother used to sing. She didn't try to make eye contact or speak. She just sat there, creating a gentle sound that wasn't intrusive or demanding. Slowly, impossibly, Emma's crying began to quiet, not stop, but soften. Harrison leaned forward, hardly breathing. Sarah kept humming, adding quiet words now, not directed at Emma, just thinking aloud. "When I was 6, my ear hurt so bad I thought my head would explode. The doctor said it was an infection, but it felt like something was stuck inside, pressing and pressing." Emma's hands lowered slightly from her ears. For the first time in 3 months, she looked at someone with something other than pain in her eyes. She looked curious. What? What was stuck? Emma's voice was hoarse from crying, barely a whisper. Sarah's heart nearly broke at the sound. She kept her tone casual, conversational. Turned out it was just fluid from being sick, but it felt like a monster lived in my ear, pressed on my eardrum until I couldn't think about anything else. "Ah, my ear hurts," Emma whispered, tears still streaming. "But all the doctors looked. They said nothing's there. Daddy thinks I'm lying." "I don't think you're lying," Sarah said softly. "I think something hurts and nobody's figured out what yet. Would you let me look? Not like a doctor, just like someone who knows how ears can hide secrets." Harrison started to protest, but Mrs. Chen's hand on his arm stopped him. Emma studied Sarah with red-rimmed eyes, then slowly, painfully, nodded. Sarah approached the bed carefully, sitting beside the small girl. "Which ear?" "Left," Emma whispered, already crying harder at the thought of someone touching it. Sarah gently tucked Emma's blonde curls behind her ear, angling the child toward the window's natural light. She looked closely, seeing what she expected, a pink, normal-looking outer ear. But Emma's reaction when Sarah barely touched near the ear canal made her pause. "Emma, sweetheart, have you had anything near your ear recently? Did you put anything inside it? Maybe a bead or a toy?" "No!" Emma's protest was instant. "I didn't. I never put things in my ears. Mommy told me never to." The mention of her mother sent fresh sobs through the little girl. Harrison's face went white. Sarah kept her voice steady. "I believe you, but sometimes things get in ears by accident. May I look a little closer? I'll be so gentle." With Harrison hovering nearby and Mrs. Chen holding Emma's hand, Sarah used her phone's flashlight to peer into Emma's ear canal. At first, she saw nothing but normal pink tissue. Then Emma shifted slightly, and light caught something, a tiny reflection far back in the canal, something that shouldn't be there. "Mr. Bradford," Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, "I need tweezers, the smallest, finest ones you have, and I need you to trust me for the next 60 seconds. "What did you see?" Harrison demanded. "Something the doctors missed because they weren't looking for it. Something so small and deep that their otoscopes probably showed it as a shadow. Emma, honey, I need you to be very, very still. Can you do that for me?" Emma, exhausted and desperate, nodded against the pillow. What Sarah pulled out 3 minutes later, working with painstaking care while Emma whimpered, was a tiny pearl, barely 3 millimeters across, but with a sharp, broken edge. It had been lodged so deep in Emma's ear canal that it pressed against her eardrum, creating constant agonizing pressure. The moment it was out, Emma's crying stopped. The silence was deafening. Harrison stared at the tiny pearl in Sarah's palm, his face cycling through shock, relief, and something darker. How did that get there? When? Why didn't anyone find it? Emma, Sarah said gently, do you remember how this happened? The little girl's eyes went wide with sudden memory. Mommy's necklace. The night before the car accident, I was playing with her pearl necklace while she tucked me in. One broke off and I thought I put it on the nightstand, but she dissolved into tears again. But these were different. These were tears of release, of grief, of a child who'd been in pain so long she'd forgotten what normal felt like. The funeral, Harrison said hoarsely, pieces clicking into place. The crying started right after the funeral. 3 months ago. This has been in her ear for 3 months and 17 specialists missed it. Mrs. Chen's face was stone. 17 specialists who spent 15 minutes each, looked at their screens, and billed you thousands of dollars. Sarah held Emma as the little girl cried herself out, this time with arms wrapped around the nanny who'd saved her. Harrison sank into his chair, his hands shaking. Why didn't you tell the doctors about the pearl? He asked Emma gently. I didn't remember, Emma hiccuped. It hurt so much, and I was so sad about Mommy, and then I forgot about the necklace. It just kept hurting and hurting. Sarah met Harrison's eyes over Emma's head. In that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, and the first hint of something neither expected. But there was also a question in Harrison's expression that Sarah recognized. This wasn't just about a missed pearl. This was about how many other things had been missed in Emma's care, how many other people had failed her, and what else might be lurking in the shadows of this perfect penthouse life. Emma finally fell asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in 91 days. Sarah gently laid her on the pillow and stepped back. You're hired, Harrison said. Whatever you were making before, I'll triple it. Move in today. Emma needs you. I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice to my current family, Sarah began, but Harrison was already shaking his head. I'll pay whatever is necessary to expedite that. My daughter just slept peacefully because of you. Money is not an object. Sarah studied the billionaire who just offered her more than she made in 6 months. She should feel grateful, victorious. Instead, something nagged at her, that tiny pearl with its sharp, broken edge. The way Mrs. Chen's expression had darkened when Harrison mentioned all the missed diagnoses. The subtle tension in this immaculate home that had nothing to do with Emma's crying. I'll start Monday, she agreed. But Mr. Bradford, I need to ask, who examined Emma most recently? And who has access to her room? Harrison's eyes narrowed. Why does that matter? Because, Sarah said carefully, pearls don't break themselves, and they don't embed themselves perfectly in ear canals by accident. Someone should check that necklace. See if any other pearls are loose or damaged. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. The necklace was Victoria's. She wore it every day. It was her grandmother's, Harrison said slowly. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we make sure Emma's safe, Sarah interrupted. That's all. But as Mrs. Chen went to retrieve the necklace and Harrison made calls to fire his medical team, Sarah looked at the sleeping child and felt the first whisper of dread. Because in her nursing training, she'd learned something important. Injuries this precise, this perfectly placed, rarely happened by accident. And if someone had wanted a 6-year-old to suffer without obvious cause, a tiny pearl with a sharp edge, placed just right, would be almost impossible to detect. The question was, who would want to hurt Harrison Bradford's daughter, and what else were they planning? The Bradford penthouse transformed over the weekend. Sarah moved into the guest suite, a space larger than her entire Bronx apartment, with views of Central Park that made her dizzy. But she barely noticed the luxury. Her focus was entirely on Emma, who clung to her like a lifeline and still woke crying in the night, though now from nightmares rather than pain. By Monday morning, Emma's ear had healed enough that the pediatric specialist Harrison hired, the 18th doctor, Sarah noted grimly, confirmed no permanent damage. But the psychological trauma of 3 months in agony had left deeper wounds. "She doesn't trust easily anymore," Sarah told Harrison over coffee in his study while Emma napped. "That's going to take time." Harrison looked 10 years younger than he had Friday, though exhaustion still shadowed his eyes. He'd shaved, changed into a crisp suit, and was attempting to return to work. His phone had buzzed 17 times in the last hour. "Take whatever time she needs," he said. "I've cleared my schedule for the week. Bradford Tech can survive without me." "Actually," Sarah said carefully, "I think some routine might help Emma. She needs to see life can be normal, and she needs to see you being you, successful, confident, present, but not hovering." Harrison studied her with those sharp blue eyes that probably terrified boardrooms. "You're very direct, Miss Mitchell. Sarah, and you hired me to help Emma, not to tell you what you want to hear." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough, Sarah. My lawyer wants to meet with you today, by the way. Something about the necklace." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd spent all weekend thinking about that pearl. "Did they find anything?" "See for yourself." Harrison gestured to a velvet box on his desk. Inside lay Victoria Bradford's pearl necklace, or what remained of it. Of the 60 perfectly matched pearls, 7 showed signs of damage. Tiny cracks, broken edges, weakened drill holes. The kind of damage that wouldn't be visible to a casual observer, but would make them dangerously fragile. "The jeweler says this is consistent with chemical exposure," Harrison said, his voice eerily calm. "Someone soaked these pearls in something acidic, not enough to destroy them, but enough to weaken their structure. They would break with minimal pressure." Sarah's hands trembled as she examined the necklace. Victoria wore this every day. Every single day. It was her most precious possession. Harrison's facade cracked slightly. The clasp broke at Emma's birthday party, 3 days before the accident. The pearls scattered everywhere. "We thought we found them all." Emma loved playing with them, while Victoria wore the necklace at bedtime. It was their ritual. So, when one broke in Emma's hand that night, she didn't think anything of it. Neither did Victoria. They'd been breaking occasionally for weeks, we thought, from normal wear. Harrison's voice went cold. "Someone poisoned my wife's necklace, knowing she wore it daily, knowing Emma played with it. Someone wanted those pearls to break." "But why?" Sarah whispered. "What would be the point?" "That's what Detective Morrison is here to determine." Harrison nodded toward the door, where a woman in her 50s stood, badge visible on her belt. Detective Lisa Morrison had a face that had seen too much and eyes that missed nothing. She studied Sarah with professional interest. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you're the one who discovered the pearl in Emma's ear." "Yes." Sarah's mouth went dry. She'd never been questioned by police before. "Walk me through exactly how you found it." "Every detail." For the next hour, Sarah recounted everything, her observations of Emma's pain, the way the crying intensified with touch, the lucky angle of light that revealed the foreign object. Detective Morrison took notes, asked pointed questions, and said very little about her own conclusions. "Mr. Bradford," Morrison finally said, "I need access to all household staff records, visitor logs, and security footage from 6 months before your wife's death to present day." Harrison went pale. "You think someone in my home did this?" "I think someone with access to your wife's belongings damaged that necklace over time. Someone who knew her habits, knew Emma's bedtime ritual. That requires intimate knowledge of your family." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, but we need to investigate everyone close to you." Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her timing impeccable as always. "Shall I gather the staff, sir?" "As everyone who's worked here in the last year," Morrison said, "starting with those who had access to Mrs. Bradford's jewelry." Over the next 3 hours, the penthouse became a crime scene of sorts. Sarah stayed with Emma, who woke frightened by the unusual activity. They read stories and played quiet games while voices murmured in other rooms and strangers examined Victoria's belongings. Sarah? Emma's small voice was uncertain. Is Daddy in trouble? No, sweetheart. The police are just making sure everyone's safe. Because of Mommy's necklace? The one that hurt my ear? Sarah chose her words carefully. They want to understand how that pearl got broken, to make sure it doesn't happen again. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting the blanket. Auntie Rachel was mad about the necklace. Sarah's heart stuttered. What do you mean? When it broke at my party, Auntie Rachel said Mommy didn't deserve it, that it should have been hers. Emma's eyes were wide and serious. She said Grandmother gave it to the wrong daughter. Ice flooded Sarah's veins. Emma, did you tell your daddy this? I forgot. Everything got fuzzy after Mommy died. Emma's lower lip trembled. Is it important? Very important, honey. Let's go talk to your dad right now. Harrison's face went from confusion to fury in seconds as Emma repeated what she'd told Sarah. Detective Morrison's pen moved rapidly across her notepad. Rachel, Harrison said through gritted teeth. My sister-in-law, Victoria's younger sister. Where is she now? Morrison asked. Connecticut. She moved there 2 months ago, right after... Harrison stopped, pieces clicking into place. Right after the funeral. Right after Emma started crying. Mrs. Chen spoke quietly from the corner. Miss Rachel visited the day before Emma's crying began. She spent time in Emma's room saying goodbye. I thought it was grief. Morrison was already on her phone. I need a warrant for Rachel Hartley's residence in Connecticut, possible connection to suspicious death and child endangerment. The rest happened in a blur. Rachel Hartley was brought in for questioning within hours, her Connecticut condo searched. What they found made the headlines. Emails to jewelers about pearl damage, research on ear canal anatomy, searches for undetectable ways to harm a child, and, most damning, a diary detailing her jealousy of Victoria, her belief that Harrison should have married her instead, and her plan to make Emma suffer as revenge. She didn't mean to kill Victoria, Morrison explained later after Rachel confessed. The necklace damage was meant to upset her, to ruin her most precious possession piece by piece. But when the clasp broke and pearls scattered, Rachel saw an opportunity. She took several damaged pearls. The night she visited Emma before moving, she waited until the child was asleep and carefully placed one in her ear canal, deep enough that casual examination wouldn't find it. Sarah felt sick. She wanted Emma to suffer. She wanted Harrison to suffer, Morrison corrected. She blamed him for choosing Victoria. In her mind, making his daughter mysteriously ill, making him helpless to fix it, was justice. She didn't count on you. That evening, after Rachel had been arrested and charged, after the media had descended and been pushed back, after Emma had been checked thoroughly by doctors who confirmed no other injuries, Sarah found Harrison on the penthouse terrace, staring at the city lights. She was family, he said without turning. Victoria loved her, trusted her with Emma. I'm so sorry. Sarah didn't know what else to say. You saved my daughter's life. Harrison finally looked at her, and in his eyes was something raw and real, not just from the pain, from Rachel. If Emma had been sent to stay with her aunt while I dealt with grief and business, like Rachel kept suggesting, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Emma's safe now, Sarah said firmly. That's what matters. Harrison studied her in the dim light. Stay, please, not just as Emma's nanny, as, I don't know the right word, guardian, protector, friend. Sarah offered quietly. Emma needs friends who keep her safe. So do you. Something shifted between them then. Something neither was ready to name. Harrison Bradford had built an empire on calculated risks and strategic moves, but standing here with a woman from the Bronx who'd saved his daughter with tweezers and intuition, he realized all his power meant nothing compared to her simple courage. Inside, Emma called for Sarah, her voice strong and clear for the first time in months. Coming, sweetheart, Sarah called back, then paused. Mr. Bradford, Harrison, we're going to get through this, all of us. As she disappeared inside, Harrison stood alone with his thoughts. Rachel's arrest would dominate the news cycle. Bradford Tech's stock would fluctuate on his personal scandal. His family secrets were now public property. But his daughter was laughing again, sleeping peacefully, healing from wounds both physical and emotional. And somehow, a nanny who'd arrived 4 days ago with everything she owned in a backpack had become the person he trusted most in the world. The penthouse lights glowed warm against the cold November night, and for the first time since Victoria's death, Harrison Bradford felt something he'd forgotten: hope. But in a high-rise across town, someone else watched those lights and made a very different calculation. Because Rachel hadn't acted alone, and the pearl in Emma's ear was just the beginning of a plan that went much, much deeper. The real threat to the Bradford family hadn't been arrested yet. They were still inside the house. Dr. Patricia Waverley had been Emma's primary care physician for 4 years, recommended by Victoria herself back when Emma was 2. She had an office on Park Avenue, a waiting room filled with the children of Manhattan's elite, and a reputation for excellence that justified her $800 consultation fees. She also had $47,000 in her offshore account that Rachel Hartley had transferred over the past 6 months. Sarah didn't know this yet, but she knew something was wrong. It started 2 weeks after Rachel's arrest, when Emma developed a fever. Nothing alarming, just 102 degrees, the kind of mild illness children got constantly. Sarah wanted to monitor it at home with rest and fluids, but Mrs. Chen insisted they call Dr. Waverley. "She's been Emma's doctor since she was a toddler," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Mr. Bradford trusts her completely." Dr. Waverley arrived within the hour, her professional smile perfectly calibrated, her medical bag expensive leather. She examined Emma with practiced efficiency while Sarah watched from the corner of the bedroom. "Just a minor viral infection," Waverley announced. "I'll prescribe something to bring the fever down. She should be fine in a few days." She scribbled on her prescription pad, handed it to Sarah and gathered her things. "Call me if she's not better by Friday." After Waverley left, Sarah studied the prescription. Acetaminophen, standard for fever. But the dosage seemed high for a 6-year-old. Not dangerously high, but at the upper limit of the recommended range. Sarah's nursing training whispered a warning. She pulled out her phone, cross-referenced the dosage with Emma's weight. It was within acceptable parameters, but barely. For a child who'd been through trauma, who might have a sensitive system, it seemed aggressive. "Mrs. Chen," Sarah said carefully, "has Dr. Waverley always prescribed at these levels?" The housekeeper frowned. "I'm not sure. Mrs. Bradford handled all Emma's medical care." "Why?" "Just being cautious." Sarah made a decision. "I'm going to give Emma half this dose and see how she responds. If the fever doesn't break, we'll increase it." By morning, Emma's fever was gone. She woke up cheerful, asking for pancakes, seemingly having fought off whatever minor bug she'd caught. Sarah filed away her concerns about Dr. Waverley's prescription, but didn't forget them. The second incident came a week later. Harrison had slowly returned to work, though he video-called home 3 times daily to check on Emma. Sarah had established a routine: mornings with educational games and reading, afternoons in the park when weather permitted, evenings with quiet family dinners that Harrison joined when he could. Emma was thriving. The nightmares had decreased, her appetite had returned, and she'd started asking about going back to school. Sarah had researched child therapists specializing in trauma, and Emma had begun weekly sessions with Dr. Lin, a kind woman who worked through play therapy. Everything seemed to be heading toward healing. Then Dr. Waverley called with urgent news. "I've reviewed Emma's records from after the Pearl incident," she told Harrison over speakerphone in his study, with Sarah present at his request. "I'm concerned there may be residual damage to her eardrum. I'd like to schedule her for a minor surgical procedure to examine it properly." Sarah's instincts screamed. Dr. Waverley, the specialist who examined Emma 2 weeks ago, found complete healing. He said her eardrum showed no scarring or damage. "I'd prefer to be thorough," Waverley said coolly. "Given what Emma's been through, we can't be too careful." The procedure is minimally invasive, just a small incision to get a better look. What specialist did the follow-up? Harrison asked Sarah. Dr. Chen at Columbia Presbyterian. He's one of the top pediatric ENT surgeons in the country. Harrison's expression hardened. Dr. Waverly, with respect, if Dr. Chen says Emma's ear is healthy, I'm inclined to trust that assessment. Let's schedule a consultation with him instead before considering any procedures. There was a pause on the line. Of course, Mr. Bradford. I only want what's best for Emma. I'll send over my findings for Dr. Chen to review. After the call ended, Harrison looked at Sarah. You didn't think that was necessary? I think Dr. Chen would have mentioned if further examination was needed, Sarah said carefully. And I think minimally invasive still means putting a 6-year-old under anesthesia. That's not something we do unless absolutely necessary. Agreed. Harrison made a note on his phone. I'll have Dr. Chen review Waverly's findings. If there's genuine concern, we'll proceed. Otherwise, his phone buzzed with a message. His face went pale. What is it? Sarah asked. Detective Morrison. Rachel made bail. Her lawyer got it reduced, claimed she wasn't a flight risk. Harrison's jaw clenched. She's out. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Can she come near Emma? There's a restraining order. She can't come within 500 feet of any of us. But Harrison didn't look reassured. Morrison says to be vigilant. Rachel's legal team is building a defense claiming temporary insanity from grief. They're going to argue she wasn't in her right mind. Over the next week, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Nothing concrete, just the prickle of awareness when she took Emma to the park, the sense of eyes following them in crowded places. She mentioned it to Harrison, who immediately increased their security detail. A discreet bodyguard now shadowed their outings, and the building's security had Rachel's photo with instructions to alert police if she appeared. But the threat didn't come from outside. It came from inside, from the person they all trusted. Emma's next scheduled checkup with Dr. Waverly was on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had hesitated about keeping the appointment, but Harrison pointed out that continuity of care was important, and Morrison had assured them Rachel was being monitored. Waverly had been Emma's doctor for years. Surely she could be trusted. Sarah should have listened to her instincts. The examination started normally enough. Waverly checked Emma's ears, throat, and breathing. Then she suggested updating Emma's vaccinations. She's current on all her vaccines, Sarah said, having reviewed Emma's complete medical file. The next ones aren't due for 8 months. I'm recommending we advance the schedule given her recent trauma. Her immune system may be compromised. Waverly was already preparing a syringe. This is just a booster, perfectly safe. Something in the way Waverly avoided eye contact made Sarah's blood run cold. She looked at the syringe, at the vial Waverly had drawn from, at the tiny label that seemed somehow wrong. Dr. Waverly, may I see the vial? Sarah kept her voice steady, casual. Waverly's hand tightened on the syringe. That's unnecessary. I'm a licensed physician. Then you won't mind showing me. Sarah moved between Waverly and Emma, her nurse's training overriding her fear. Emma, sweetie, go wait with Mrs. Chen in the waiting room, please. Miss Mitchell, you're overstepping, Waverly began. Show me the vial, or I'm calling Mr. Bradford right now. Sarah pulled out her phone. For a moment, Waverly's professional mask slipped, and Sarah saw something ugly underneath. Desperation, maybe, or calculation. Then the doctor set down the syringe with exaggerated care. I think this appointment is over. You've undermined my medical authority in front of my patient. I'll be discussing this with Mr. Bradford. Please do, Sarah said coldly, and leave that vial. I'm sure he'll want it tested. Waverly's face went white. She grabbed her medical bag and left without another word, but the vial remained on the examination table. Sarah took a photo of it, then called Harrison. Don't let Emma have anything Dr. Waverly prescribed. I think we have a bigger problem than Rachel. The vial's contents, tested by an independent lab Harrison hired, contained a sedative cocktail far too strong for a child Emma's size. Not immediately lethal, but dangerous, potentially causing respiratory depression, possibly coma if administered at the dose Waverley had prepared. She was going to hurt Emma, Harrison said, his voice shaking with rage as they sat in his study that evening. Emma safely asleep upstairs, with Mrs. Chen standing guard. In her own office, in broad daylight, Detective Morrison sat across from them, her expression grim. "We executed a search warrant on Dr. Waverley's office and home 2 hours ago. We found communications with Rachel Hartley going back 7 months. Rachel paid her $47,000 to ensure Emma received appropriate care." "Appropriate care?" Sarah repeated, horrified. "Rachel's plan was more sophisticated than we initially thought," Morrison continued. "She didn't just want Emma to suffer from the pearl. She wanted her to have ongoing, mysterious health issues. Issues that would drain Harrison emotionally and financially, that would dominate his attention, that would slowly break him down. Waverley was supposed to create those issues." Harrison's hands clenched into fists. The high fever medication doses, the unnecessary surgery recommendations, all designed to either cause problems or miss real ones, Morrison confirmed. Waverley would have administered that sedative today, then claimed Emma had an adverse reaction to a standard vaccine. Emma would have been hospitalized, possibly suffered complications, and it would have looked like tragic bad luck, not malpractice. Sarah felt sick. How did we not see this? "Because Waverley's been Emma's trusted doctor for years," Morrison said. "Rachel cultivated her carefully, found someone with gambling debts and a lifestyle she couldn't quite afford. Someone who could be bought. The payments started small, just little oversights in Emma's care. Then Rachel escalated after Victoria's death, when Harrison was vulnerable and distracted." "Is Waverley talking?" Harrison asked. "Singing like a canary, hoping for a deal. She's giving us everything. Every communication with Rachel. Every plan they discussed." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Bradford, Miss Mitchell saved your daughter's life twice now. Once from the pearl, and today from whatever Waverley had planned next." Harrison looked at Sarah, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "I don't know how to thank you." "Keep Emma safe," Sarah said quietly. "That's all the thanks I need." But as Morrison left and Harrison went to check on Emma one more time, Sarah stood by the windows overlooking Central Park and felt the weight of everything. 2 attempts on a 6-year-old's life, both orchestrated by people who should have protected her. How many other threats lurked in Emma's world? How many other people might want to hurt Harrison Bradford through his daughter? Downstairs, the doorman called up. A delivery had arrived. "Flowers for Miss Mitchell," the card said. Sarah had them brought up, curious who would send her flowers. The card read, "Thank you for caring for our Emma. With gratitude, the Bradford family." But when Sarah looked closer at the arrangement, her blood froze. Tucked among the roses and lilies were small white flowers she recognized from her nursing training. Lily of the valley. Beautiful, fragrant, and highly toxic if ingested. The kind of thing a child might pick at and put in her mouth. Sarah called Harrison back immediately, showed him the arrangement. His face went from confusion to fury to fear in seconds. "Morrison!" he barked into his phone. "Get back here, now!" The florist, tracked down within the hour, had no record of any delivery to the Bradford penthouse. The card was forged. The arrangement hand-delivered by someone who'd bypassed building security by claiming to be from a well-known shop. Security footage showed a woman in a delivery uniform and hat, face obscured, who knew exactly where the service elevator was and which floor to access. Someone with insider knowledge. "Rachel couldn't have done this," Morrison said, reviewing the footage. "She's being monitored. We'd know if she left her apartment." "Then who?" Harrison demanded. Morrison's expression was grave. "Mr. Bradford, I think you need to consider that Rachel may have had more than one accomplice, someone who's still close to your family, someone who knew Sarah would likely receive those flowers and that Emma might be curious about them." Sarah looked at Mrs. Chen, who'd worked for the Bradford family for 30 years. At the security team Harrison had hired, at the household staff who came and went, at the endless stream of people who had access to their lives. Somewhere among them was someone who wanted Emma dead, and they'd just made their next move. Harrison Bradford fired his entire household staff the next morning. All 17 people who'd worked in the penthouse, from Mrs. Chen to the newest cleaning service employee, received severance packages and 30 days' notice. The only person he kept was Sarah. "Sir, this is extreme," Mrs. Chen protested, her composure finally cracking. "I've known you since you were Emma's age. I loved Miss Victoria like my own daughter." "I know," Harrison said, and the pain in his voice was evident. "But someone in this house helped Rachel. Someone who knew our routines, our security, our vulnerabilities. Until I know who, I can't trust anyone." Mrs. Chen left with tears in her eyes, and Sarah felt the loss acutely. But she couldn't argue with Harrison's logic, not when Emma's life hung in the balance. They moved to a corporate apartment Bradford Tech maintained in Tribeca, a temporary safe house, while Harrison had the penthouse swept for surveillance devices and every staff member thoroughly investigated. Detective Morrison coordinated with the FBI, given the escalating nature of the threats and the wealth involved. Emma took the disruption hard. The 6-year-old had just started feeling safe again, and now everything was changing. She clung to Sarah, refused to eat, and the nightmares returned with a vengeance. "I want to go home," Emma sobbed on their 3rd night in the apartment. "I want Mommy. I want Mrs. Chen. I want my room." Sarah held her through the tears, helpless to offer anything but comfort. "I know, sweetheart. I know it's scary. But your daddy is making sure everything is safe. We'll go home soon." "Why do people want to hurt me?" Emma's question cut straight to Sarah's heart. "I didn't do anything bad." "You didn't do anything wrong at all," Sarah said fiercely. "Some people are just broken inside. They make bad choices that hurt others. But you have people who love you and will keep you safe." Harrison stood in the doorway listening. When Emma finally fell asleep, he gestured for Sarah to join him in the living area. "Morrison called," he said quietly. "They found something." Sarah's heart raced. "What?" "Mrs. Chen's grandson, David. He's been in financial trouble, gambling debts, bad investments. 3 months ago, he received $50,000 from an untraceable offshore account." Harrison's face was stone. Mrs. Chen didn't know. She thought he'd gotten a bonus from his job, but the FBI traced it back through 6 different shell corporations to Rachel. Sarah felt the floor tilt. David. He visited the penthouse sometimes, didn't he? Every Sunday for family dinner, at Mrs. Chen's insistence. He knew our routines, our security codes, everything. Harrison's voice was hollow. "He's the one who delivered the flowers. Security footage analysis confirmed his build and gait, even with the disguise. Where is he now?" "Gone. Disappeared 2 days ago, right after the flower delivery. Morrison thinks he realized the net was closing and ran." Harrison poured himself a whiskey with shaking hands. "Mrs. Chen is devastated. She had no idea her own grandson was being paid to facilitate attempts on Emma's life." Sarah thought of kind Mrs. Chen, who'd been nothing but protective of Emma, whose only fault was loving her family. "This isn't her fault." "I know. But I can't have her back until we're certain David isn't using her as a source of information." Harrison drained his glass. "We're hiring an entirely new security team. Former Secret Service, FBI vetted, the works. New staff who have no connection to our family history. We're essentially starting over." "What about Emma's life? Her friends, her school, her therapy?" Harrison looked at her with exhausted eyes. "Dr. Lin can do telehealth sessions. School can wait. I'm hiring private tutors, also vetted. As for friends..." He trailed off, helpless. "She's 6 years old, Harrison. She needs normalcy. She needs to be a child, not a prisoner." "She needs to be alive," Harrison snapped, then immediately looked ashamed. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to protect her and give her a normal life. Every time I think we've found the threat, another one appears." Sarah moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Then we find them all. We root out every single person Rachel compromised, every danger, every weakness, and then we rebuild Emma's life on a foundation that can't be shaken. How? The vulnerability in his question reminded Sarah that underneath the billionaire exterior was a father who'd already lost his wife and was terrified of losing his daughter. We start by asking the right questions. Morrison is chasing Rachel's accomplices, but what about Rachel's motive? She wanted revenge on you for marrying Victoria, but was that really enough to justify this level of planning? To corrupt a doctor, to recruit Mrs. Chen's grandson, to risk federal charges? Harrison frowned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we don't know the whole story. Maybe there's more to Rachel's vendetta than jealousy. Sarah pulled out her phone, where she'd been keeping notes. Think about it. The necklace damage started months before Victoria died. The recruitment of Dr. Waverley was systematic. This wasn't a grief-stricken sister acting out. This was a long-term plan. But Morrison has her diary, her communications. It's all about her obsession with me, with punishing me through Emma. Surface level, yes. But what if that's what she wanted people to think? What if the jealousy story was cover for something deeper? Sarah opened her notes. Harrison, I need to ask you something personal. Victoria's death, the car accident. They ruled it accidental, right? Harrison's face went carefully blank. Yes. She was driving home from a charity event. Rainy night, sharp turn, the car went into a ravine. They said she lost control. Was she alone? Yes. I was at a tech conference in San Francisco. Emma was with Mrs. Chen. His eyes narrowed. Sarah, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that Rachel had access to Victoria's car, that she had months to plan, that damaged pearls might not have been her only sabotage. Sarah took a breath. I think we need to ask Morrison to reopen the investigation into Victoria's death. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Harrison spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You think Rachel killed my wife. I think it's worth investigating. If Rachel was willing to torture a 6-year-old child for months, what else was she capable of? Harrison stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the Tribeca night. When he turned back, his expression was transformed. No longer the exhausted father, but the tech mogul who'd built an empire through calculated risks and strategic thinking. Get Morrison here, now! And Sarah? He met her eyes. If you're right about this, if Rachel murdered Victoria and we can prove it, she'll never see daylight again. But we need to be absolutely certain before we go down this road. Morrison arrived within 40 minutes. And what she brought changed everything. We arrested David Chen 2 hours ago in Newark, she said without preamble. He was trying to board a flight to São Paulo. He's talking, Mr. Bradford. And what he's saying corroborates Miss Mitchell's theory. Harrison gripped the arm of his chair. Tell me, according to David, Rachel approached him 6 months before Victoria's death. Not 3 months ago like we thought. 6 months before. She paid him to install a remote device in Victoria's car, hidden in the entertainment system. The device could interfere with the electronic controls. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The accident wasn't an accident. The rain, the sharp turn, those were real factors. But Rachel triggered the interference at that specific moment, knowing Victoria was a careful driver who'd likely overcorrect on that dangerous curve. It was calculated to look like weather-related loss of control. Morrison's expression was grim. David kept the device controller as insurance. We recovered it from his apartment. Our techs confirm it's functional and was actively used the night Victoria died. Harrison made a sound like he'd been punched. She murdered my wife, and then she systematically targeted Emma as the next phase of her revenge. Morrison continued. David says Rachel's plan was to make Emma sick enough that you'd be forced to step down from Bradford Tech to care for her full time. With you out of the company and consumed by Emma's mysterious illness, Rachel would swoop in as the grieving sister, offer support, gradually position herself as the stable maternal figure Emma needed. She wanted to replace Victoria, Sarah breathed, completely. David says Rachel's endgame was to convince you that Emma needed intensive psychiatric care, something Dr. Waverly would have supported with falsified diagnoses. Rachel had researched facilities in Switzerland, places that would keep Emma indefinitely. With Emma institutionalized and you broken by guilt and exhaustion, Rachel believed you'd eventually turn to her, that she'd finally get what she thought Victoria had stolen from her. Harrison stood, walked to the bar but didn't pour a drink. His hands were shaking too badly. How long has she been insane? The psychiatric evaluation we ordered shows a personality disorder with obsessive features, but she's legally competent. She knew exactly what she was doing. Morrison's voice softened. Mr. Bradford, I'm sorry. I know this doesn't make it easier. Actually, it does. Harrison turned, and his eyes were hard as diamonds. Because now I know exactly what we're dealing with. Not a grief-stricken sister who made bad choices. A murderer who killed my wife and tortured my daughter. That clarity matters. She'll be charged with first-degree murder for Victoria, attempted murder for Emma, conspiracy, and about 15 other felonies. With David's testimony and the physical evidence, she'll never make bail again. Morrison closed her folder. It's over, Mr. Bradford. She can't hurt Emma anymore. But Sarah's instincts prickled. What about Dr. Waverly? Is she talking about anyone else Rachel might have recruited? Morrison hesitated. Waverly claims Rachel hinted at other investments in her plan, but wouldn't give details. David says the same thing, that Rachel mentioned backup plans, but we haven't found evidence of anyone else. That doesn't mean they don't exist, Sarah said. Harrison looked at her and she saw he was thinking the same thing. They'd found 2 accomplices. What if there were more? Morrison, I want protection on Emma and Sarah 24/7 until we're certain there are no other threats, Harrison said. And I want every person who's ever worked for me, every business associate, every family connection thoroughly investigated. If Rachel planted anyone else in my life, I want them found. Over the next week, the FBI investigation expanded. Every aspect of the Bradford family's life was scrutinized, and slowly, a picture emerged. Rachel had been planning this for over 2 years, since before Victoria had even gotten pregnant with Emma. Her obsession with Harrison had festered since their college days, when he dated her briefly before falling for Victoria. But they found no other accomplices, just Rachel, Dr. Waverly, and David Chen, 3 people who'd nearly destroyed a family. Emma gradually returned to herself as the threat receded. Harrison hired a vetted team of household staff, security experts who'd protected diplomats' children, and they moved back to the penthouse, which had been swept clean and updated with state-of-the-art security. Life began to find a new normal. Emma started trauma therapy with Dr. Lin 3 times a week. Harrison scaled back his Bradford Tech hours, determined to be present for his daughter's healing. And Sarah found herself in an impossible position. She'd taken this job as a temporary nanny. She'd never intended to become the person Emma clung to in the night, the person Harrison consulted before making any decision about his daughter's care, the person who'd somehow become central to this family's life. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked one evening, finding her on the terrace while Emma slept peacefully inside. "That this was supposed to be a job," Sarah admitted, "and it's become something else. Would that be so terrible?" She looked at him. This man who'd been through hell and somehow emerged stronger, who'd learned to trust again despite betrayal, who looked at her like she was essential rather than hired help. "I live in the Bronx, Harrison. I take the subway to work. Before I met you, my biggest purchase was a used laptop." She gestured at the penthouse, the view, the world he inhabited. "This isn't my life." "It could be." He stepped closer. "Sarah, you saved Emma twice. You saw what everyone else missed. You protected her when I was too broken to see the threats. You're not just her nanny, you're her guardian angel. And what am I to you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Harrison's answer was simple, honest, devastating. "Everything I didn't know I needed." Before Sarah could respond, Emma's scream pierced the night. They ran to her room, finding her sitting up in bed, pointing at the window. There was someone there, a person, looking at me. Harrison immediately hit the panic button that alerted security, while Sarah held Emma close. Within seconds, armed guards swept the penthouse. Morrison, who'd been monitoring their security feed, called in. "We show no breach," she said. "All windows are secured. No one could have accessed the building without triggering alarms." "Emma saw someone," Sarah insisted. "She's not making this up." They checked the room thoroughly. Nothing. Just a little girl's nightmare, explained by weeks of trauma. But when Sarah tucked Emma back into bed, she noticed something odd. The window overlooking the terrace was still latched, still secure, but on the outside of the glass, barely visible, was a smudge. The kind left by someone pressing their face against the window. From the outside, 23 floors up. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she realized what it meant. Someone had accessed the building's exterior, rappelled or climbed to Emma's window and looked inside. Someone who was still out there. Someone Rachel had never mentioned. The FBI's investigation into the window incident revealed sophisticated equipment. Commercial climbing gear, suction devices for scaling glass buildings, technology that cost tens of thousands of dollars. Whoever had accessed Emma's window 23 floors above Manhattan wasn't an opportunistic accomplice. They were a professional. "Rachel couldn't have afforded this," Morrison said, showing Harrison and Sarah the equipment analysis. "Her financial records show the payments to Waverly and David, but nothing on this scale. Someone else funded this." Harrison's face was pale. "Who?" "That's what we're going to find out." Morrison pulled up financial records on her laptop. "We've been so focused on Rachel's personal vendetta that we missed the obvious question. Who benefits from your destruction?" "Business rivals?" Sarah suggested. "Possibly. Bradford Tech has made enemies, but this is personal, intimate. Someone who knows Emma's bedroom window specifically, who knows her routines." Morrison highlighted several transactions. "We've been analyzing Rachel's finances backwards, looking at who she paid. What if we should be looking at who paid her?" Over the next 3 days, forensic accountants traced Rachel's money. The $50,000 she'd paid David, the $47,000 to Dr. Waverly, her legal fees, her Connecticut condo, all funded by regular deposits from shell corporations that eventually traced back to a single source. A source that made Harrison's blood run cold. "Marcus Vance," he said, staring at the name on Morrison's screen. "My former business partner." Sarah frowned. "I've never heard you mention him." "Because I bought him out 8 years ago, before Emma was born, before I married Victoria." Harrison's hands clenched. "Marcus and I founded Bradford Tech together in college. We were best friends, roommates, partners, but as the company grew, our visions diverged. He wanted to focus on government contracts, surveillance technology. I wanted consumer cloud services, privacy-focused products." "So you split," Morrison said. "I bought him out for $60 million, fair market value at the time. The company was worth maybe $200 million then. Now it's worth $12 billion. Harrison's jaw tightened. "Marcus has spent years claiming I stole his life's work, that the buyout was coerced, that the company's success should have been his." "Has he made threats?" Morrison asked. "Legal ones. He sued me 3 times. All suits dismissed. He gives interviews to business magazines about how I betrayed him. He's tried to poach my executives, undercut my deals." Harrison met Morrison's eyes. "But I never thought he'd go after my family." Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. Rachel was the weapon, but Marcus was the hand wielding it. "He funded everything," Morrison confirmed. $3 million over 2 years, funneled through various corporate structures. He paid Rachel to torture your family, Mr. Bradford. The question is why? "Revenge," Harrison said bitterly. "Destroying my peace, my family, making me suffer while he watched." But Sarah shook her head. "It's more than that. Think about it. If Emma had been institutionalized like Rachel planned, if you'd stepped down from Bradford Tech consumed by guilt and exhaustion, who would have been positioned to take over the company?" Harrison's eyes widened. the board would have voted for new leadership. Marcus still has connections to several board members, people who were there from the beginning. If I was gone and the company destabilized, he'd swoop in as the returning founder, the steady hand to guide Bradford Tech back to stability. Morrison nodded. We found communications between Marcus and 3 of your board members. Nothing explicitly criminal, but definitely positioning himself as a viable replacement CEO. This was a corporate takeover, Sarah breathed, using a child as the weapon. Harrison stood abruptly, rage pouring off him in waves. Where is he? Under surveillance as of 2 hours ago, Morrison said calmly. We need more evidence before we can arrest him. The financial trail is solid for funding Rachel, but we need to prove he knew what she was doing with the money, that he specifically intended harm to your family. The climbing equipment, Sarah said suddenly. That was recent, after Rachel's arrest. Marcus knew his plan was falling apart, so he sent someone to, what? Scare Emma? Verify she was still accessible? Morrison's phone buzzed. She read the message, and her expression hardened. Marcus just boarded his private jet at Teterboro. Flight plan filed for the Cayman Islands. No return ticket. He's running, Harrison said. FBI is grounding the plane now. We have enough to hold him for questioning. Morrison stood. Mr. Bradford, I need you to trust me to handle this by the book. Don't do anything that could compromise the case. After Morrison left, Sarah found Harrison on the terrace, staring at the city that had been his kingdom and his battlefield. He tried to take everything from me, Harrison said quietly. My wife, my daughter, my company, my sanity, because he was jealous of money. Not just money, Sarah said gently. Your success, your family, your happiness, everything he thought should have been his. Victoria would still be alive if not for him. Harrison's voice broke. Emma would never have suffered, all of it, the pearl, the fear, the nightmares. It all traces back to Marcus's greed and Rachel's obsession. Sarah took his hand, felt him grip hers like a lifeline. But Emma survived. She's healing, and now we can make sure no one else gets hurt. Marcus Vance's arrest made international headlines. The tech world reeled at the revelation that the co-founder of Bradford Tech had orchestrated a multi-year campaign to destroy his former partner's family. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, communications with Rachel detailing the plan's progress, payments to the professional climber who'd accessed Emma's window. Rachel offered a plea deal to testify against Marcus, revealed everything, how Marcus had initially approached her 3 years ago, recognizing her obsession with Harrison and offering to fund her revenge if she'd make it destroy Harrison's stability. How Marcus had suggested the Pearl idea, the doctor corruption, the gradual breakdown strategy. How he'd promised Rachel that once Harrison was broken, she could have him, while Marcus reclaimed Bradford Tech. She still believes she loved you, Morrison told Harrison after Rachel's testimony. Even knowing Marcus used her, she thinks if things had worked out, you'd have eventually chosen her over Victoria. Harrison's response was cold. She's delusional, and she murdered my wife. I hope she spends the rest of her life in prison, understanding exactly how wrong she was. Both Rachel and Marcus were convicted on multiple charges. Rachel received life without parole for Victoria's murder. Marcus got 40 years for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges. Dr. Waverley and David Chen received reduced sentences for their cooperation, but both would spend years in federal prison. The trials took 8 months. Through it all, Sarah stayed. She'd meant to leave once Emma was safe, once the threats were neutralized. But somehow, the temporary nanny position had become permanent. Emma needed her, and truthfully, she needed Emma too. Harrison had asked her to stay officially on Emma's 7th birthday, 6 months after Marcus's conviction. They'd thrown a small party, just Emma, Sarah, Dr. Lin, and a few carefully vetted friends from Emma's new school. Watching Emma laugh and play, seeing her finally act like a normal 7-year-old without fear shadowing her eyes, Sarah felt the weight of the past year lift. She's thriving, Harrison said quietly, standing beside Sarah as Emma opened presents. "She's resilient. Children are." Sarah smiled. "She'll always carry some scars, but they won't define her. Thanks to you." Harrison turned to face her fully. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I've been trying to find the right time, the right words, but there's never going to be a perfect moment." Sarah's heart raced. "Harrison, let me finish. Please." He took her hands. "When you walked into our lives, I was drowning. I'd lost Victoria, was losing Emma, didn't know who to trust or how to save my daughter. You were supposed to be temporary help, just a nanny to cover until I figured things out. I know. But you became the person who saved Emma's life twice. The person who saw threats no one else noticed. The person who made this house feel like a home again." Harrison's blue eyes were intense, vulnerable. "You became the person I trust most in this world, and somewhere along the way, you became the person I fell in love with." Sarah's breath caught. She'd felt it too, the slow building of something between them. The late-night conversations after Emma's nightmares, the shared looks across the dinner table, the way he'd started asking her opinion not just on Emma's care, but on business decisions, life choices, everything. "I'm not Victoria," Sarah said carefully. "I can't replace her. I don't want you to replace her. Victoria will always be Emma's mother, always be a part of our family's story. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and Emma's still here, and we both need you." He squeezed her hands. "Not as an employee, as family, as a partner, as someone I want to build a future with." Sarah looked past him to where Emma was showing Dr. Lin a new toy, her face bright with joy. The little girl who'd been crying in agony 14 months ago, who'd been poisoned and terrorized and traumatized, was now laughing and whole. "I love her too," Sarah admitted. "I love her like she's mine. And I love—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I love you, but Harrison, I'm still the girl from the Bronx who took the subway to work. Your world becomes yours if you want it, or we find a middle ground, or we figure it out together." Harrison smiled, and it transformed his face from tech mogul to just a man in love. "I've learned that money and power mean nothing compared to having the right people beside you. You're the right person, Sarah. For me, for Emma, for this life we're rebuilding." Emma chose that moment to run over, throwing her arms around both of them. "This is the best birthday ever. Can Sarah live with us forever and ever?" Harrison and Sarah looked at each other over Emma's head, and Sarah saw her own answer reflected in his eyes. "Yeah, sweetheart," Sarah said softly. "I think I can do that." They married quietly 6 months later, a small ceremony in the penthouse with only close friends and family present. Emma was the flower girl, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, she cheered louder than anyone. Harrison kept Bradford Tech, but scaled back his hours, promoting a trusted COO to handle day-to-day operations. He'd learned that all the money in the world meant nothing if he missed Emma's school plays and bedtime stories. The company continued to thrive under his strategic guidance, but it no longer consumed his life. Sarah finished her nursing degree, graduating top of her class. She worked part-time at a children's hospital while being Emma's mom, not nanny, not stepmother, but the person Emma called Mommy Sarah, and loved unreservedly. Emma herself grew into a bright, strong child who remembered her birth mother with love, but didn't let the traumas of her early years define her. She became a passionate advocate for children's safety, even at age 9, giving talks at Harrison's company about trusting your instincts and speaking up when something feels wrong. Mrs. Chen returned to work for them after her grandson, David, entered witness protection with a new identity, having testified against Marcus. She and Sarah formed a partnership in managing the household, and the older woman became a grandmother figure to Emma that the child cherished. Dr. Lin continued as Emma's therapist, watching with professional pride as her young patient processed trauma in healthy ways and emerged resilient. "She's one of the strongest children I've ever worked with," she told Harrison and Sarah during a check-in session. What happened to her was terrible, but the response, the love, the protection, the stability you've built, that's what defines her future now. On Emma's 9th birthday, 3 years after the trials, Sarah found Harrison on their terrace. The same terrace where he'd once stood, broken and desperate, where they'd first begun to fall in love. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "How close I came to losing everything. How different life could have been if you hadn't noticed that pearl, if you hadn't trusted your instincts about Dr. Waverley, if you hadn't asked the hard questions about Victoria's death. But I did, and we're here now. All of us, together and safe." Harrison pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her temple. "Marcus is up for parole review next year. He'll be denied. Morrison assures me of that, but it means Emma might have to testify again. Remember everything. Then we'll help her through it, just like we've helped her through everything else." Sarah looked through the glass doors to where Emma was setting up for her birthday party, directing friends with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and protected. "She's not that scared 6-year-old anymore, Harrison. She's strong. We made her strong." "You made her strong," Harrison corrected. "You and your stubborn insistence on trusting your instincts, even when everyone told you to back down." Sarah smiled. "Well, someone wise once told me that sometimes the best answers come from unexpected places. A billionaire told me that, actually. Very handsome, very smart, terrible at seeing what was right in front of him." Harrison laughed, the sound free and genuine. Lucky he had someone to help him see clearly. Emma burst onto the terrace. "Mom, Dad, everyone's here. Come on." They followed their daughter inside, into the warmth and noise of a child's birthday party, into the life they'd built from ashes and pain and almost unbearable loss. A life that proved love could triumph over hatred, that families could be rebuilt, that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and care, and the right people refusing to give up. As Emma blew out her candles and made her wish, Sarah caught her eye. The little girl who'd cried for 91 days straight, who'd suffered tortures no child should endure, grinned at her with pure, unfiltered joy. "What did you wish for?" Harrison whispered. Emma's answer was simple, perfect, everything. "Nothing. I already have everything I need." That night, after the guests left and Emma fell asleep surrounded by presents, Sarah and Harrison stood in her doorway, watching her peaceful breathing. "Still have nightmares?" Harrison asked quietly. "Occasionally. Dr. Lynn says that's normal, that they'll fade more with time." Sarah leaned against him, "But she knows she's safe now. That's what matters. She knows we'll protect her, that we'll believe her, that nothing and no one will hurt her again." Harrison wrapped his arm around her. "Thank you for everything, for seeing what I missed, for staying when you could have left, for loving us both when we were broken." "Thank you for letting me," Sarah replied, "for trusting a stranger from the Bronx with your daughter's life, for building this family with me." They stood there in the doorway for a long moment, watching over the child they both loved, guardian angels who'd learned that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in billions, but in moments like these, quiet, peaceful, filled with love and the promise of tomorrow. Emma stirred slightly, smiled in her sleep, and whispered something too soft to hear. But Sarah imagined she knew what it was. A thank you to the universe for second chances, for families built from choice rather than blood, for the kind of love that saves you when you need it most. Outside, New York City glittered with millions of lights, millions of stories, millions of lives intersecting in ways both tragic and beautiful. The Bradford family had lived through tragedy, had faced evil that tried to destroy them, had emerged scarred but unbroken on the other side. And in a penthouse high above the city, 3 people who'd found each other against impossible odds slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but they'd face it together. The girl who'd been tortured and saved, the father who'd lost everything and found it again. The nanny who'd trusted her instincts and changed all their lives. Their story could have ended in darkness, in loss, in permanent damage. Instead, it ended here, in light, in love, in a future built on the foundation of those who refuse to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only option. Sometimes the most valuable things can't be bought with billions. Sometimes the smallest gesture, removing a pearl from a child's ear, changes everything. Sometimes the people who save us come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, even after the darkest night, dawn still comes.